Question number 7, the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister of State-Owned Enterprises and asks, what was Solid Energy's debt in 2008-09 and what is it in the latest annual report?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Todd McClay.
Mr Speaker, as at 30 June 2009, the company held $50 million of bank debt on its balance sheet. Currently, it has bank debt of $320 million, but its full exposure is closer to $500 million. The falling international coal price means Solid Energy is not viable in its current form, and there is no prospect of it being able to be in a position to repay or refinance this bank debt.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
To the Minister, will the government now admit that they were wrong in 2009 when they wrote to Solid Energy demanding higher dividends, which eventually totaled $164 million and forced Solid Energy to raise their debt levels by hundreds of millions of dollars, when international best practice for coal companies is to have near zero debt?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Todd McClay.
Mr Speaker, no, I don't accept that, and indeed Solid Energy, it's been quite some period of time since it didn't have debt at all. Mr Speaker, this is a very challenging industry. It has been for a period of time. A previous board made investment decisions at a time when a coal price was much higher than it is today. Indeed, it was at the top of the price then. Since then, successively, year by year, that price has come down. Unfortunately, this company, with the changing circumstance of coal price, is no longer sustainable in its current form.
Point of order, the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Speaker, I seek leave to table a letter dated 28 May 2009 from the then Minister of SOEs, which notes the government wanting Solid Energy to take on more debt to finance expansion and pay larger dividends.
The document's been described. Leave is sought to table that particular letter dated 28 May 2009. Is there any objection? There is none. It can be tabled.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Richard Prosser.
Speaker, to the Minister, given those answers, does he have faith in the Treasury's oversight group, the Crown Ownership Monitoring Unit? If so, why?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Todd McClay.
Yes, Mr Speaker, yes I do, and that group and others in Treasury have gone under a reform over a period of time. Certainly this government is more focused on state-owned enterprises than any government has been previously. The reason for this is we expect them to be well managed, to be low risk, and to focus on their core responsibilities and activities, and to return a fair dividend for the taxpayer. There are state-owned enterprises, however, that haven't focused on their core activity responsibilities. That's one of the challenges we face with Solid Energy.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
To the Minister, given that the fall in coal prices impacted companies around the world and they have survived by focusing on their core business, why did the government, which was receiving monthly reports from 5 June 2012 on the state of Solid Energy, cheer it on as it burnt through money on risky ventures and racked up an unsustainable level of debt, and then the government blocked all parliamentary inquiries into what went wrong?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Todd McClay.
Mr Speaker, Solid Energy is not the only coal company in the current situation that it is in the world. Indeed, there is a company in Australia that was bought by an American group a few years ago for close to $1 billion. 2 weeks ago, it was sold for $1. All over the world, coal companies are facing similar challenges as Solid Energy. Mr Speaker, the announcement that has been made by the board today gives a greater opportunity for those people employed by Solid Energy to keep their jobs, and for trade suppliers to Solid Energy to continue to be paid, and for them to continue their business activity.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable Clayton.
Mr Speaker, I seek leave to table an Australian mining report of 12 August, which is entitled 12 August 2015, which is entitled Coal Exports Breaking Records.
I just need the source of the document, please.
The Australian mining newsletter, Coal Exports Breaking Records in Newcastle,
on the
Australia.
basis that it may not be freely available. Order. It's a simple question I'll put to the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove. Is it easily obtainable by members if they wish to seek it? Then it's easily obtainable. I won't be putting the leave.
Supplementary, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Speaker, to the Minister, Why has no one been held accountable for Solid Energy's unprecedented collapse, in that no minister has resigned or has been sacked for being asleep at the wheel and taking no action despite years of repeated warnings from their own officials? None of the then board were fired for a complete lack of governance, and no senior management were removed or disciplined despite outlandish spending and reckless decision-making. In fact, the only people who lost their jobs were the men and women at the coalface.
Order.
Mr.
The
Speaker.
Honourable Todd McClay.
No, Mr. Speaker, the member is simplifying a very complicated situation with Solid Energy. Indeed, the current board is a different board than the one he was speaking of that made investment decisions around Solid Energy that have created some of these challenges. Also, Mr. Speaker, the key senior management team of Solid Energy is also different. They have been working as hard as they can over the last 2 years to ensure that this company has a future, to ensure that people can go to work tomorrow, and it's a very challenging situation, Mr. Speaker. They've worked hard. We need to recognise the hard work, not only of that team, but of the people that work for Solid Energy in all regions of New Zealand.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Damien O'Connor.
To the Minister, Mr. Speaker. Having destroyed over $1.7 billion of company value, accrued $320 million worth of debt,
Order, can I have the question,
injected,
please? Order, the
there is a
question.
injected $128 million of taxpayers' money, Mr. Speaker, and destroyed the jobs of over 1,000 workers.
Order. Member will resume his seat. I've called for the question. The member continues to outline information that may be facts if the member wants to call them that, but that's not necessary for the question. It is creating disorder. I have two choices, either to stop now and not allow the question, or to give the member one chance to rise and ask his question. And I will do that, but if it's going to be supplemented with a whole lot of information the member thinks is relevant, and I don't, he risks the question being ruled out of order. The Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Can I start again, Mr. Speaker?
Yeah, the member can start again, but if I don't hear the question very quickly, it will be ruled out of order and we'll be proceeding.
Mr. Speaker, in light of all those facts, is the minister now comforted? He can't hear it.
Order.
Speaker.
I start again and then refer to a question that's been ruled out of order.
Order.
It's not out of order.
I hadn't ruled it out of order. Now the member's getting to his question. Is the minister, and then he got interrupted. Would the member please proceed with his question?
Mr. Speaker, in light of all the facts laid down in the House this afternoon, is the minister now comforted by the fact that his government's asset sales program is now back on track?
The Honourable Todd McClay.
No, Mr. Speaker, those aren't facts, but I do agree with the member and recognise he's as concerned for coal mining as workers in the area he represents as the government is. What I would say to him and others who are listening is the proposal announced today is the very best opportunity for people in these regions to keep their jobs. However, over the next 5 weeks, the administrator must engage with creditors around the country. They will be asked to vote on this proposal. Should they vote on it, then there is a future for some of these assets. If they vote against it, then the only alternative is likely to be a liquidation, and that's not something the government is hopeful for, and I know that member isn't on behalf of his constituents.
Question number 8, Clayton Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Broadcasting, asked, does